all. Harry, the DOJ's internal watchdog is going to investigate the seizure of communications records of Congress members during the Trump era. What are they going to be looking for, and how could it help shed light on what Trump was using the DOJ to do?
It'll help, but it's not enough. So the OIG will look at only current employees, no power to force non-employees to talk to him. And also, it could take a year, 18 months, but he'll sit down with the remaining people there and say, what exactly happened here? How did it come to be that these guys were on the list? And it's important to note, Alicia, there are potential non-sinister explanations here, which makes it all the more important that there be a full investigation. But leak investigations are needle in a haystack propositions, and they may be saying it was just a piece of hay in the stack that we didn't know about. But that's what he'll be looking toward. It'll be a limited inquiry and a long inquiry, and not a substitution for a full congressional inquiry.
Katie, I'd love to know if your analysis matches Harry's, but also I don't need to remind you, Trump had been falsely publicly calling Adam Schiff a leaker, constantly calling for an investigation. How could that be used as evidence now?
Well, it would just be evidence that there was the complete and total politicization of the Department of Justice during the Trump administration. I mean, you know, there's actual Supreme Court precedent, Alicia, concerning federal grand jury subpoenas, because that's exactly what was used in this case as the vehicle by which the records were obtained for 73 phone numbers and at least 16 email addresses from Apple. And this prior Supreme Court precedent says that these grand jury subpoenas, although they can be readily issued as long as they're generally relevant to an investigation, they can never be used as a fishing expedition. And they certainly cannot be used if the targets of those subpoenas are done out of malice or for some type of malevolent intent or some type of specific political intent. And that's exactly what we all need to know. If Barr denies knowledge, if Sessions denies knowledge, and now we know that Rod Rosenstein from reporting is denying knowledge, then what does that mean? Is there some rogue division at the Department of Justice during the Trump administration that was running around issuing these subpoenas or getting these subpoenas issued to be able to get these records? It's concerning, and the American public needs to know. And so the Senate Judiciary Committee should have hearings, and people like Barr, Sessions, Rosenstein, they should testify and explain why they were doing what they were doing.
Well, Betsy, talking about Bill Barr, your latest reporting talks about how the former AG is now distancing himself from those Trump-era subpoenas of lawmakers, writing, Barr said that while he was Attorney General, he was not aware of any congressman's records being sought in a leak case. He added that Trump never encouraged him to zero in on the Democratic lawmakers who reportedly became targets of the former president's push to unmask leakers of classified information. Betsy, what does it say that even Bill Barr does not want to touch this?
It tells you that this isn't great. Usually people like Barr and Sessions are the most enthusiastic defenders of the most controversial steps that the Justice Department took during the Trump administration. The fact that the first response from the former Attorney General was to say that he didn't know about this without putting forward any sort of defense or any sort of plausible argument that, hey, maybe this wasn't that bad. The fact that we're not hearing that from him tells you everything you need to know about the potential significance or the actual significance of this news that's broken over the weekend. One thing that's important, taking a step back, is to look at the context of this. And that is, in the very early days of the Trump administration, the Justice Department, led by Sessions and Rod Rosenstein, rolled out aggressive, torqued up focus on finding people who were leaking or sharing information with journalists, including classified information, finding them, prosecuting them, and trying to put them behind bars. This became a top priority for the DOJ's National Security Division, even though that division has finite resources, and I'm sure you and I could think of one or two or several other national security problems that might be a slightly higher concern, slightly higher threat to this country than people talking to reporters. But at the Justice Department, in response to the president's broader constant tweets and comments and harangues about these classified leaks, the department moved forward with this effort to try to hunt down as many people as possible who talked about classified material with journalists. And that's the context in which the department ended up even if it's the most benign explanation possible, that's the context under which the department ended up actually hoovering up information from two lawmakers, part of the job that they have, of course, is to oversee the Department of Justice.
And Harry, one of those lawmakers, Schiff, is calling on AG Merrick Garland to clean house inside of DOJ. What would that look like?
Yeah, he is. And that's a really important point because the pressure grows on Garland. He's tried very much to take the approach of, I'll now just stay in my lane and do it right and leave the past behind. But the pressure grows on him, including with these recent decisions. What would it look like? It would look like more investigations like this. It would look like more policy initiatives of the sort he's undertaking already with, say, voting rights that he's announced. And it would mean that he actually is putting his hands around certain problems from the past. A really quick point on the investigation. Everything Betsy and Katie say is right. And the big question is, was it politically motivated? But we don't think right now that Schiff and Swalwell were the actual targets. Rather, they were a number called by one of the targets. It's a problem, but we don't have yet a smoking gun that they were targeted in a political way.
Yeah, somebody's dog is very upset about this. Katie, to zoom out, what happens if this passes without consequence? Yeah, I've lost her audio. I'm sorry. Betsy, I'm going to kick that over to you.
Yeah, what happens is one more piece of damage that Trump did to the reputation of the Justice Department will remain intact. Whatever the explanation is for how this happened, the fact that it happened, that it was possible for these members of Congress to have their information sucked up in this way and not get notification in time is something that is going to further erode public confidence in the wall of separation between DOJ and the White House. So, to Harry's point, this is something that's become a priority for Merrick Garland. The challenge it presents, of course, is that there are many cases where perhaps the White House wishes they could somehow signal to the Justice Department, maybe recalibrate some things. For instance, the Justice Department is defending Trump in litigation involving rape accusations against him. That litigation has continued under Merrick Garland. And White House officials can say, look, if they had their say, if there was political sway over DOJ, that litigation probably would not be going on. And what this means is that the cost or the challenge to the Biden administration is, are they willing to actually take some of the potential hits, deal with some of the complicated or nuanced headlines that will be required in order for the public really to have confidence that DOJ is acting independently of the White House, independently of political officials in the Biden administration. And something for viewers to keep an eye out going forward is, when do they see news of DOJ taking steps that perhaps wouldn't be politically beneficial to the White House? And that, very interestingly, is one of the signs that the institution itself is regaining the independence that traditionally it's enjoyed and that has been absolutely bedrock to the American public having confidence in our federal law enforcement system.